outline Amnesty International. We're a worldwide movement working on human rights. We're independent of all government political parties. Our reason for being is the protection of human rights. And we have a global following of more than 3 million people. So it's quite a movement, and to bring that to bear on mental health I think is really important. I also just wanted to sort of talk about where human rights began. Well, they didn't begin, I mean, they go back, but how we apply them at the moment. And it was following the Second World War. That's Eleanor Roosevelt there. In 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was signed. And it's a world where the dignity and humanity of each and every person should be respected by all nations. The first article, I think, is very inspiring. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights, and it's something that we forget a lot, and I think is very particularly forgotten around mental health. Whereas human rights belong to all people without restriction. To talk then a little bit about how your rights are protected in law. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as I said, was signed in 1948, but it wasn't made law until a few years later. There are two important legal documents around human rights and how they're protected in countries in law. The first one is the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which I think probably people associate with Amnesty a lot more. We're talking about political prisoners, death penalty, that type of a work. But just as equally important and often forgotten is the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. And within that, particularly, your right to health. You have a right to health. It's a human right. It's the same right to education as well. And I think we often don't talk about that as a human right. More recently, there has been a new convention which is specifically on the rights of persons with disabilities, and mental health is included in that. As I said, going back to that first article of the Universal Declaration, all human beings are born equal in dignity and rights. That has been so neglected around people with disabilities that this new covenant was written and signed because it was recognised that it didn't create new rights, it just reaffirmed that all human rights apply to people with disabilities, and particularly mental health we talk about in our campaign. So there you go, that was the legal history. I'll talk now about participate. And I like that kind of flipping of the normal understanding of disability and recognising that we are all different. We all have different particular needs at different times, and it is our role as a society to be as inclusive as possible and not to see the disability but to see the ability. So that's talking a bit about what the gold standard of mental health and human rights should look like. And now I just wanted to maybe briefly talk about what the actual situation is in Ireland today. And unfortunately, it's not as pretty as the convention would lay out. We know that people, if you have experiencing a mental health problem, you're more likely to face human rights infringements. We know that we have a mental health service that is dominated by inpatient care and over-medicalisation. We know that the department and the HSC do not know where all the funding goes. We are not being efficient with our spending. As I said, it doesn't always mean more money needs to be spent, but the money that we have is not being spent properly and it's not being accounted for, which is obviously a waste at any time. In current situation, it's even worse, and especially, as Deputy Neville said, with mental health only getting 5% of the health budget currently, we need to be extremely careful about how it is being spent and that it's being as efficient and effective as possible. Our current mental health laws are not in line with the latest human rights standards. And one of the more shocking situations that still continues in Ireland today is that children who are experiencing mental health problems are still being detained in adult wards, which, as you can imagine, is frightening and absolutely detrimental to their recovery and is not providing them the correct therapeutic care. So those are sort of a snapshot of headlines of where our serious problems are.